With us now, Stephanie Rhule, veteran of the investment banking and business world, host of the 9 a.m. hour on this network, also happens to be NBC News senior business correspondent. Stephanie, lay out what you heard that doesn't match the truth.
An awful lot. We should first start with that specific group of CEOs. The last time we saw them at the Rose Garden, we should remember, one company that both Vice President Pence and Donald Trump talked about was Google. They said that Google was developing a very special website. It would be ready Sunday. That press conference was on a Friday. That website would enable people to fill out a questionnaire, figure out if they needed a test. If the answer was yes, it would direct you to a local testing center. That was on March 13th. That hasn't happened yet, so we'll start from there. The president introduced this as the greatest leaders in the retail industry. And don't get me wrong, a lot of them are. But what was very specific about every CEO there, whether it's Walmart, CVS, Quest, LabCorp, they all run businesses that are considered essential businesses. They are open and they are hiring. They are not reflective in any way of the awful economic picture that we're facing and what most business leaders are. So it was very tough, at least for me, to hear the president keep talking about the retail industry. Because the retail industry, Brian, is among the worst hit. There are 47 million people employed in retail. They're hemorrhaging jobs. They're hemorrhaging money right now. Retail industry pays $20 billion a month in rent. And I assure you, anyone involved in retail watching the president was praying he was going to talk about some sort of national rent relief. And he mentioned PPP. This is the most important program for the 30 million small businesses in America, most of whom were shut out of the first tranche of it. The second tranche, over $300 billion, went online today, and I can tell you it was disastrous, the execution. The president said, I put this squarely on the banks. I got to tell you, I spent my entire day talking to people who couldn't get on the system and the banks. And I'm going to give you one example. The 5 largest banks had $100 billion worth of loans approved, underwritten, ready to go. They needed to put them in the SBA's system called E-Tran. And you know what happened with the system? It broke down. Not because great people at the SBA aren't working around the block, but because it is the Department of Motor Vehicles that has been cast to put on the Grand Prix. They cannot do that. It has been an absolute failure. And every day that these small businesses don't get money, Brian, we are closer to them going out of business. And I'll make one more point. The president continues, as he attacks China, to say, but guess what? We brought in billions of dollars in tariffs from China, and that money went to help the farmers in trouble. That is a flat-out lie. China didn't pay us the tariffs. We pay the tariffs. The president then put together $30 billion of farm aid, government money, to the farmers because of the trade war he put on that made the demand for their goods drop. So the president is absolutely not telling the truth when it comes to trade and China. And when he talks about building the greatest economy ever, and in the third or fourth quarter, it's going to be better than ever, I ask you this, Brian. Even if we open everything up in this country, which you know we're not, even if we do, once we adhere to social distancing rules and our restaurants, bars, movie theaters, stadiums, and airplanes are only half full, which will be the rules, we will face a wave of bankruptcies again in this country. So the president simply isn't telling the truth. And to bring on a tiny group of CEOs that represent a small vertical of businesses that are thriving because the demand for their goods and services are massive because of Corona, they do not represent the rest of the country. And certainly they do not represent the economic devastation that we're facing today and we're going to face going forward.
Steph, why do you reckon he keeps saying we brought in billions of dollars in tariffs?
Because it sounds good. Because we know that farmers got $30 billion in aid, and the president likes to say that he's a free markets guy. Farm aid like that, is a form of socialism. The president doesn't want to acknowledge that. I get that. So he likes to say, we got it from China. Because at the end of the day, Brian, when you're suffering, when you need help, and someone writes you a check, I don't think you're spending that much time figuring out where the check came from. You're just glad that you got it. But if people actually dug in and understood where that money comes from and what it does to our overall economy, they might feel different. But when you're desperate and you need to support your family, you're just happy to have the relief. And if the president tells you those bad people in China are the ones who got us that money, you'd feel pretty good. Unfortunately, it's a flat-out lie.
Final question. When people hear, as they will, a statement he repeated several times today and has certainly said in the past, quote, "I built the greatest economy in the history of the world." How does that strike someone like you with your background?
Brian, it's just really hard for people to hear that right now. It's really hard for people to hear the president continue to say, look at the stock market. Let's say something about why the stock market is doing well. The stock market is not doing well because companies are making tons of money. The stock market, which is currently very disconnected from the real economy, is staying afloat because the Fed is pumping an enormous amount of liquidity, 4 times the amount of liquidity we saw after the financial crisis, and they're doing it to keep us alive. The president didn't create the greatest economy ever. There wasn't a turnaround. He deregulated. He created enormous corporate tax cuts. And guess what? We did a whole lot of hiring. Those are really good things. But a lot of the good things that happened because of consumer spending. And you know what consumers aren't doing right now, and they're not going to do in 3, 6, or 10 months? They're not going to be out there spending, not with any great gusto. So he's giving a lot of false hope to people right now who are suffering.
Got to say, it's tough to think about where the spending is going to come from, to your point. Stephanie Rhule, thank you for being part of our coverage.